So we're going to talk about some Aqua tints. We did our line etching project, and so everybody has a pretty good understanding of what and how you do line etching. Now we are going to be talking more about Aqua tint. So I've got some examples here. I've prepped my plate, and I've got a few different test strips here that I wanted to show you. This is a pretty good test plate. It's still a little bit, you know, it's got a couple little issues here where the density is not quite where I'd like to see it. It could be a little bit more. It probably means that it's not sprayed fully, but we have a pretty good transition in there. Same with this one, and we'll talk about a little bit more of that afterwards. But an Aqua tint is basically a way to achieve tonal variation by using spray paint, or traditionally we would use powdered rosin. Now, traditionally I would take a plate like this and I bring it over to a rosin box, and I would hook up an air compressor or a crank with a fan and just allow the fan to run to push up all of the rosin, the powdered rosin that is in this box. So if you look in here, you can see there's this powdered rosin here. Now, the heavier pieces of the rosin, the bigger pieces, would all settle very quickly, you know. So imagine a fan kicks up all this dust into the box, and then all the heavier particles settle very quickly, but all the lighter, smaller particles will kind of linger in the air and slowly come down. So I would wait a minute and then put my plate in, and that way I would have finer particles of rosin come down and settle on my plate. Then I would carefully bring this over to the hot plate and heat it up, and it would fuse that rosin to the plate. Now the reason I would do that is because rosin is protected from the corrosive effects of the nitric acid. So wherever there's a little particle of that rosin on my plate, it would reject the ink, or reject the acid. Now, because, you know, there is some fire hazard issues with rosin, you know, it's easily flammable, and we don't want to inhale powdered rosin either. So we've switched over to using spray paint for this. And so what we do, and just to tell you ahead of time, is we're going to lean our plate up, and we're going to spray paint from a distance about 24 inches, 18, 24 inches. We're just going to overspray our spray paint, and instead of using rosin to fuse onto our plate, we're using the enamel paint itself, which will also protect the plate in certain areas while allowing acid to etch around the particles. So I'll illustrate that for you here. If I take a cross section of a plate, and I imagine all these little particles of enamel paint sitting on the surface of the plate, I want to have a little bit of distance between the particles so that the nitric acid can bite and make little pockets in my zinc that will allow ink to go into, and that will allow me to pull tonal variations out of my plate. Now, it's important to have a consistent layer of spray paint on my zinc plate. If it's inconsistent, say my particles are too spread apart, so I didn't spray the spray paint enough on my plate, what will happen is there'll be too much space between the particles to protect the plate, and it will just kind of open bite large pockets of my plate. And those large pockets, once they're widened, they don't really hold ink. It's easy to wipe out the ink from those large pockets. So what happens is you're gonna have open biting, okay? So I won't have a consistent tonal variation or gradation that happens with the plate. Now, also, over time, the acid will bite underneath these particles and lift them off, and then just open bite underneath. So like the spray paint is being overpowered by the nitric acid. Now, if I overspray my spray paint and it's too dense on the surface, there's no place for the acid to make contact with my zinc plate, and so there's too much spray paint. There's not going to be very much contact with the zinc plate between the particles, and so again I won't have a consistent image. It'll actually appear lighter rather than darker. So I really want to look for something like this where the coverage on the plate is consistent, it's enough, it's not too much, you know, it's just right. And usually you have to use a loop to look through and keep track of that. Now, you need to reapply your spray paint as well. So if I put my zinc plate in the acid for sometimes even just 5 seconds, you'll notice that the times for Aquatints are different than line etching. With line etching, we're dealing with minutes, so we'll go from 1 to 2 minutes in the acid, up to 5 minutes to 10 minutes, 20, 30, 60, you get the point. But with Aquatint, there's a lot more that happens in just the first 2 minutes. So this is 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20, 40, 1 minute, and 2 minutes. And that's about 50% of our gray value is in the first 2 minutes in the acid. And every time I take my zinc plate out of the acid, I want to dry it very carefully, and I want to inspect it with a loupe to see if I have to reapply my spray paint, because I will have to do that fairly often. Rosin is a little bit more stable, but spray paint, the nitric acid will lift it off. So I have to be careful, and I need to pay attention to it. If I don't pay attention to it, then something will happen where it's more like this, where I get to a point, it's looking good, it's getting darker, and then all of a sudden it's getting lighter. So that means there's too much of the spray paint has been lifted off and my plate has begun open biting. You can see that here as well. So you can see there's a consistent transition happening, and then right here you can see it starts to get a little bit mottled and less consistent. And so that means the people have undersprayed their spray paint on the zinc plate, and then they corrected it here. So you can see you can correct it, but you know, it's difficult to keep track of, so you really have to pay attention. Okay. Let's go spray this with spray paint, and I'll bring a loupe over. We have several loupes. There's usually a couple up there on the shelf, and there's usually 1 or 2 back here. So there's one here, one over there. You just got to kind of look around for them. In just a minute, I will turn on the exhaust fan, but this is our spray booth right here, and you can see some stones, some lithostone scraps that we have. I'm just going to put this down. Now, not all spray paint is considered equal. This is used for several things. So some artists might be coming in here and spraying fixative on their drawings. We don't use the fixative. We use black, ideally matte black for this. And there's a couple different ones here. So you just want to kind of test these out first before you commit to using them. This, you know, some of these spray nozzles get, you can see what's happening here. So I'm gonna have to get rid of some of these, but we do have a few brand new containers. Now, every black that you could use for this might be slightly different. The black will come out much quicker and the particles might be bigger. Some might come out slower and the particles of spray paint might be very delicate and small. So you know, each might have a different effect on the way your Aquatint appears. But I'm gonna just give these a quick shake. I'm going to try 2 different ones. And I've got some newsprint here. I want to test out my spray paint first. This one is coming out slower and it's not as dense. So I might actually use the cheap one. This is just like a Walmart brand. Whereas this is Krylon. This is actually more expensive. But what I'm seeing is, you know, the difference in the particles is fairly thin on this one and a little bit thicker on that. But the density seems a little bit better. So actually I might just switch to this one just for consistency, see what's going on. Now, I want to turn on my exhaust fan. When I spray my Aquatint, I don't want my plate to be on this because more spray paint's gonna hit here than up here. I wanna try and get an equal coverage, so I like to lean it up against these stones. And when I spray, I'm gonna overspray, so I'm gonna be spraying above it and past it on both sides, and also underneath it too. Now that might have seemed like a long spray, but you know, I'm pretty used to it and I know about how much I'm gonna have to use. I probably would have sprayed more if I was using this one. So I've done my initial spray and I wanna inspect it and I wanna see what kind of coverage I have in there. So I'm gonna look through the loop and let's see if we can get you, I'm not sure if you can see that. Pretty good coverage, it looks good. I want to be very delicate with this as well. I don't want to interrupt the surface, you know, I don't want to rub this. I want to be very careful that I don't do anything. That looks good right there. I'm going to let this rest for a couple of minutes just to let the enamel dry and attach itself, you know, bind itself, fuse itself to the plate as well as I can, rather than putting it right in the acid and doing my test plate. So we're gonna let this sit for a minute and we can talk about something else. What if I overspray my Aquatint? If I overspray my Aquatint, I would have to remove it, and so to be able to start again, you know, maybe when I'm spraying my spray paint, I get like a big paint speckles, or the nozzle malfunctions and I get lots of spray coming out. If I need to remove that, then I need to use acetone. I'm pretty sure I don't have any right now, but I've got some next door. Xylene would work for this as well. I just want to take a clean soft rag, get some nail polish remover, acetone, some xylene, some goof off would work as well, and just go over the surface, remove all of that the enamel paint that's on the plate. And I'd probably want to do that a couple times. Then I'd probably want to degrease my plate again and respray it. So, you know, if something like that does happen, just know you can fix it. I don't think denatured alcohol would necessarily remove enamel paint though, so we're kind of just stuck using nail polish remover for that, or acetone. Let's see. Now the amount of time that plate is in the acid is going to determine how dark our Aquatints get, as long as we are consistently replacing the Aquatint. So let's take a look at a few different things. This, I will probably do a different demo for this later on, but if you take a burnisher and you have an Aquatint on your plate and you need to reestablish some highlights in your Aquatint, you can use a burnisher like this one. It needs to be polished a little bit. Take a little bit of oil, your 2-in-1 oil, right here. Let's see if there's a scrap plate in here I can use. Maybe we can use this. And if there's some highlights that I want to reestablish, I can add some oil to my plate and take my burnisher and just start to go into the plate where I need to reestablish those highlights. And that will push down the relief areas of the plate and make them more consistently flattened, right? So I'm flattening these areas. Now, I don't think this has an Aquatint on it, so this is probably not the best example to use, but I don't have anything else on me right now. But you can see this plate that does have an Aquatint on it, this is how I reestablish this highlight throughout the test plate. I just burnished, reestablishing some highlights, pushing down the raised areas of the plate. And you know, there's not a real way to be able to see exactly how much this is working until you print it, so you typically will have to do this in stages. And we'll look at a couple examples that might show how this is working. So you can see this is an Aquatint. You can see very nice line work in here, and then the Aquatint is working very nicely with this one. There are some images where I'm not quite sure if it's Aquatint or spit bite, and the difference with spit bite, we'll talk about that in just a second. When you're dealing with Aquatint, you usually see a hard edge around where you stopped out your Aquatints, but sometimes you can't tell because the edge is very, very soft. So this might very well be a spit bite. It could also be burnished to soften the edge to create a transition, a very delicate transition. You can see, looking right here, the whites of this, where you can imagine a brush with hard ground or stop out varnish just going over those little spots, and that's why you have these hard lines around each one of these marks. But then there's not those marks here. So that tells me that this was likely spit bite. And a spit bite is different from an Aquatint because I have a plate with spray paint on it, or rosin, and instead of submerging the plate in the nitric acid, I would actually take a solution of acid and gum arabic or water, and it's a more concentrated solution, and I would be adding it directly to the plate. Now, that usually creates softer lines, so it's more of like there's not more of a determinate shape in the value, it's a softer transitional shape, right? So you can see it's kind of like cloud-like, misty around the edges, so you don't have those hard edges where you can see the changing of the times with the Aquatint. So there's some benefits to Aquatint, and there's a few drawbacks to it as well. But there's things you can do. You can combine processes. You can use your burnisher to reestablish highlights. You can see this is a delicate Aquatint. There's one here, one here. This one you can see. So if I'm imagining my plate that has some line work on it, the first thing I would mask out with hard ground before I even put this in the acid would be like the ridge of this mushroom cap, a highlight on this snail's back, maybe a little bit of this rock, and then the rest of the plate would be exposed. I would submerge that in the nitric acid, remove it after say 10 seconds, and then mask out everything that I wanted to keep at 10 seconds. So like these pieces of grass, more of the rock, maybe these little folds in the gills of the mushroom, put it back in the acid. So at the end, the last thing is the darkest areas. The only thing that's left is the darkest areas surrounding it. The rest of this would all have hard ground on it, and I would submerge that in the acid as well. Keeping in mind that I have to be very careful about how long and how often I replace the spray paint. I need to inspect that every time I take it out of the acid. This is a nice one and beautiful transition. Again, not sure if this is spit bite or Aquatint, but there's things that they could have done, like submerging their zinc plate in the acid and slowly lowering it in the acid to create a transition. And then they could take this out, dry it off, inspect it. Maybe they need to respray in some areas up here where it's been submerged in the acid longer, and then submerge it again and keep repeating that until I have a nice dark value there. So there's things you can do, and I bet that's probably what they did with this one, because you do see kind of little steps in here. Same with this one. That's likely what happened here. Or they could have oversprayed on this side, leaving less there, but it's hard to say. So just looking at some of these Aquatints. This is most likely spit bite. Yeah, definitely spit bite. Okay, so one thing, you know, with Mesotints, Mesotint is a process where you go really, really dark with a Mesotint rocker. You can kind of achieve a similar effect if you do a very dark Aquatint throughout your image, and then you just burnish all of your imagery away from the plate, so you're working in reverse. It's a reductive method. Okay, so I think we're ready to do the first bit of Aquatint on this. And I'm just gonna prep the plate a little bit more. I forgot to add some tape here. So just tape a strip of masking tape or packing tape. And fold that over. Now I have something that I can hold on to when I take this out of the acid. And I'm just gonna drop this in for 5 seconds initially. I'm just gonna count. I let it go a couple extra seconds because there was a little bit of the plate that wasn't getting covered by the nitric acid. So let that drip. Then move it horizontal, bring it over to the sink. Carefully rinse that off. Wash off my hands. You, of course, would be using goggles and gloves. Now, when that was in the acid, you saw how there's so much of this zinc plate is exposed and open to the nitric acid that a large portion of it, you know, it all bubbled up very quickly. And that is, you know, typical of this process. But you can see and you can understand just how you would have to reapply your spray paint fairly often. The more that the spray paint builds up a layer, the more stable it becomes. But let's take a look at this through the loop again and see if we need to respray it already, because we very well may need to respray this. I can see there's still some spray paint left on this, but I can see that a lot of this has come up already. So I'm not sure how well that translates into video, but I can see that a lot of that came up. So I need to respray this already after 5 seconds in the acid. So I'm gonna let this dry a little bit more. I didn't really blot it that well. Respray it. And because this is a test print, I will mask out with hard ground my 5 seconds right there and let this dry. Then I'll come back and I'll continue doing that for the rest of the plate, and eventually I should have a nice transition as long as I'm correctly replacing spray paint. Okay, so I'm gonna come back and go through some of these steps, and I'll be back and I'll show you the results. Just a little update. Okay, so I'm going through, I've done 5 seconds and 10 seconds, and I've actually done the up to 20 seconds also. I've reapplied spray paint after 5 seconds, and then I found that I didn't have to reapply any spray paint between 10 and 20 seconds. I did get a little bit of off spray, so I didn't spray it enough off of the plate first before beginning, but I don't really, you know, this isn't necessarily something that I'm trying to perfect right now. So I did keep a little bit of this. Again, if I needed to remove all of that, I could with acetone. So I'm gonna go ahead and spray a tiny bit more back here. After looking at it through the loop, it does look like there's a couple, like some of it is lifting off, which is normal, you know, and I just want to hit it with a little bit. I don't need much. I just wanted to add a little bit of extra spray paint on this just for the next, what is it, 20 seconds that it'll be in there. And I'm just going to take a little hard ground. I'm trying to conserve this, but I should probably just pour out more than this. Check all my edges. And that should be good. I'll let that dry and I'll come back and put it in the acid for another 20 seconds. So we're going from 20 seconds to 40 seconds. It's already been in there for 20, so I just need to do 20 more. So I'm a few steps forward now, and I'm going now from 2 minutes to 5 minutes. I have added spray paint to this 2 more times, just a small dusting, and you can see there was some larger particles that are on there. And so what I did is I just took my etching needle and I kind of broke it up a little bit and just like put a little bit of a couple little dots within those larger dots with my etching needle, just to kind of break it up so it's not just one bright white dot that could occur. I don't think I'm going to be able to actually finish this for the video, so but you've seen the test strip. I will be printing this again, and maybe I can add it to the video you know, after this is posted. But I did want to say, you know, I'm ready for to bring this back into the nitric acid, and I'm going from 2 minutes to 5 minutes, so I need to leave this in the acid for 3 minutes. When I start to leave my plates in the acid for longer periods of time, I need to pay closer attention to what's happening. I can't just walk away from a plate that's in the acid for 10 minutes and expect that it's going to be okay. I need to plan ahead, and so having a feather is good. So after 2-3 minutes, you know, especially my longer times, like for 10 minutes if it's in the acid, I want to come back here and I want to dust the carbon dioxide, the CO2 bubbles that are forming on the plate. If I let too many bubbles form on the plate, then I'm gonna get bubble marks, and I'm actually gonna see the pattern of the bubbles on my plate, and I don't really want that. You know, there's cases when you can use that intentionally, but I do not want that. Same with my line etching. If I leave that on there for a long period of time, my line will actually have little dots on it that you'll be able to see, and it looks like it's like stippled lines. It's because the bubbles are preventing the acid from etching the entire line accurately. Same thing happens with a plate like this. The other thing I want to keep in mind is if I'm going from 10 minutes to 20 minutes in the acid, I'm going to want to pull this out of the acid at least every 5 minutes and check that my spray paint is still attached to the plate, because the acid will remove that spray paint on occasion. And you can see, you'll start to see it in your acid bath as well, little bits of spray paint kind of clinging to the edges. It's because the corrosive action of the paint of the acid is lifting up those particles. That's why we need to respray it. But if I need to respray it every 30 seconds in the acid, I'm definitely going to have to respray it between 5 and 15 minutes or something like that. So I would recommend that you get in the habit of coming back, taking your plate out of the acid every 3 to 5 minutes. I'm uncomfortable saying 5 minutes. I would recommend every 3 minutes. Take it out of the acid, wash it off underwater, look at it through a loop, and just check. Because, you know, it's easier to just do that, check it real quick, put it back in the acid, than it is to have to like go back and re-etch my Aquatints that weren't successfully etched. Okay.